this morning. It's my privilege to invite to take their place on the dais Dr. C. Rangarajan, former Governor IBI, Chairman Economic Council of India and former Governor of Maharashtra. Along with them, I also invite Dr. N.R. Bhanumurthy, Director, Madras School of Economics, Chennai. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome them with a big round of applause. Thank you, Dr. C. Rangarajan, for being with us this morning, despite your busy schedule. Takes a lot. Thank you for being with us this morning. Students, please settle down. Students to my left, please settle down. 30 seconds. May I request all the delegates to settle down fast, please. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome both the dignitaries on the stage with a big round of applause. Thank you so much for being here, sir, this morning. May I have their AV, please?
Dr. C. Rangarajan is one of India's foremost economists who played a seminal role in shaping India's economic reforms as Governor of the Reserve Bank of India and Chairman of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. A distinguished academic and policymaker, Dr. Rangarajan is a Padma Vibhushan awardee and currently serves as Chairman of the Madras School of Economics. Dr. N.R. Bhanumurthy is an eminent economist and director of the Madras School of Economics with extensive experience in macroeconomics, fiscal policy, and development economics. A former Vice-Chancellor of Bayes University and a Padma-level awardee, Dr. Bhanumurthy is a prolific researcher, policy advisor, and a widely quoted voice on the Indian economy.
Ladies and gentlemen, they deserve a big round of applause for being here this morning, taking the time off their busy schedule. The format is, we'll request Dr. Rangarajan to address the delegates first, and then there will be a conversation between him and Dr. Bhanumurthy. It's my privilege to invite Dr. Rangarajan to the podium. Sir, may I?
Close that. Okay. Is it all right? Good morning to all of you. It gives me a great pleasure to be with you all this morning as the Madras Management Association has organized this program on drivers of economic growth. In fact, the topic has become very critically important because of certain developments. In the last few years, the world economy has faced many shocks. First came the Russian-Ukraine war, which shattered the smooth movement of the chain of transmission of goods. Don't mind. Have you? Yeah, right. Okay. The supply chain, so to say, was broken, and even the traffic routes were broken, and it made many people to think about how and whether some of the critical inputs like chips should be manufactured at home. Then came the unilateral actions of President Trump, which shattered the multilateral trading system that has evolved since the end of the Second World War. Weaponizing tariffs in order to achieve non-economic objectives was a great shock. It is against this background we have to see what India can do in order to achieve a higher rate of economic growth. It is the aspiration of every Indian that India should become a developed country. They call it Viksit Bharat by 2047. That is when India completes 100 years of independence. There is no unique definition of a developed country. Analysts use what the World Bank uses as a criterion for high-income countries. And that is the cutoff of $14,000 per capita income. That is, any country which has a per capita income of $14,000 and more is treated as a high-income country. Now, by 2047, if we want to become a developed country, we need to know what the cutoff will be. Several people have estimated it, and I have also done, and it has to be about $14,000 now, and it has to be about $18,000 per capita income in 2047. Some have estimated it at a higher level of even $21,000. But the higher the per capita income, the higher the rate of growth of the economy has to be. So the question that we ask ourselves is, can we do it? Our per capita income today is around $3,000 US dollars. This has to go up to the level that I mentioned, $18,000 per capita income. Calculations show, on certain assumptions, that we need to grow between 7 and 8%, perhaps closer to 7.5% to achieve this. Therefore, the question is whether India can grow in a sustained way at a rate of growth of 7.5% or close to it between now and 2047. There are countries which have achieved it. For example, South Korea, per capita income in 1950s was exactly equal to our per capita income in the 1950s. But South Korea today is a member of OECD, has been a developed country, achieved the criterion of developed country several decades ago. Therefore, it is possible. Now, I would like to place before you some ideas regarding what needs to be done in order to achieve this rate of growth in a sustained way, and come back and say a little bit about what we would have to do even without some of the changes that have occurred in the recent period. And then in the context of the recent changes, what is it that we need to add to it? First of all, I think we need to increase the investment rate, or the technical word for it is the gross fixed capital formation rate of the country by 2 percentage points. India's gross fixed capital formation rate in the last 3 or 4 years, I've been hovering around 33.5 or 33.6. The calculation for the current year, according to the national income accounts, is 33.8%. Now, there is a simple formula which tells you that the growth rate of the economy is equal to the investment rate, or the gross fixed capital formation rate, divided by what we call, I call, the incremental capital output ratio. the incremental capital output ratio recently has been in the range of 5. So this 33.8 or 33.5% of GDP gives us something around the 6.5%. That is, our present gross fixed capital formation rate allows us, in fact, with some comfort, to grow at 6.5%. But if we really want to grow at 7 to 7.5%, we really need to raise the investment rate by another 2 percentage points. In fact, in the recent period, the last few years, the gross fixed capital formation rate has been increasing because of increased capital expenditures by the central government. This started immediately after the COVID-19, and in 2023-24, the capital expenditures of the government of India increased by 28.3% in that year. But then it has been coming down from that. Next year it increased by 10.8, then 4.2, and according to the budget presented, it will increase by 11.5%. To put it in summary, the government capital expenditures do contribute to the investment rate to the extent of 3%. Now, this cannot go on. I think private investment needs to pick up. I would, at this conference, I would like all of you to address this issue as to why private investment is not picking up in the recent years. What is it that is holding back private investment? All of you assembled here have a lot of experience, have been in institutions, have been in corporations which have been investing. Now, you have to look back and see why this is happening. I would say we need to address this issue at two levels. We need to address the issue at the aggregate level of how to raise it by 2 percentage points. And we also need to address the issue at the level of individual industry or sectors of the economy and why and how that investment can increase. I think it is the duty of the government to examine it and introduce such measures as are necessary to augment the investment rate. But I would also urge people like you who are assembled here, who have such rich experience, to really analyze as to why the investment rate in India has not picked up strongly in the last few years. I hope some of the developments that are happening now will help us to raise the investment rate, but I would urge you, all of you, to introspect on that. So the first is to raise the investment rate by 2%. The second is to absorb new technologies. Arrival of new technologies has been a common feature since industrial revolution. New technologies have been the ones which have been driving growth everywhere. Interestingly, this year, the three distinguished economists to whom Nobel Prize have been given have been the ones who have been working in the area of what drives innovation and how much innovation leads to growth. But to come back, that the arrival of AI or Gen AI has been welcomed with both enthusiasm and trepidation. Enthusiasm is very clear. The application of AI will necessarily lead to increase in output and will lead to increase in productivity. But the concern is, what will the application of AI to the production of goods and services result in terms of employment? This is something on which People are not fully agreed, but that's a concern. One might ask that this has been the concern since the dawn of industrial revolution. People always felt that the new machines and the new technologies were replacing the need for labor to some extent. But why this issue was not so dominant earlier? It is essentially because the increase in output, the magnitude of that, was so high that it did not bother. But what is really causing concern in the minds of many people now is that whether this will lead to the employment of less number of people. There is no clear answer. There are many people who have written on it, but the point still remains. Even a populous country like India cannot afford to ignore AI or Gen AI. We have to get used to them and have to apply these to the various sectors. AI is a good example of a horizontal innovation. A horizontal innovation is something that affects all sectors of the economy or most of the sectors of the economy. There are innovations which apply only to specific sectors. That is not the case in the case of AI. Therefore, it will spread. It has to be applied to almost all areas of economic activity. So, if India has to remain competitive, we have to absorb the new technology. We have to become capable of applying AI. In some sense, India is in an advantageous situation. This country has done a great deal in the area of computers and communication technologies. And it is therefore in a position to absorb the new technology and communicate it to other areas. Therefore, it is quite possible for India to live up to this. But we really need, at the same time, to handle the other problem, to which I shall come. But the point is, absorbing new technologies is a must. And you, as the leaders of industry, leaders of various economic activities, will have to find out in what areas AI can be applied, how that can be utilized. We cannot afford to ignore it. We cannot, because then we will be non-competitive and we will not be able to compete in the world. Third, I would say that focus on relatively labor-intensive activities. India, strangely enough, is a country in which technologies of different centuries coexist. Look at transportation. I still see some bullock carts. It is not as if bullock carts have disappeared. Therefore, in a sense that there are industries or the manufacture of products where the labor intensity is relatively higher. And therefore, we need to identify such industries and really make use of them. Now, what do I mean relatively labor intensive? The per unit of output or per rupee of output, how much labor is involved? That is, in the case of variety of commodities, we can look at and see which area in which there is a greater employment of labor per unit or per rupee of output. This can be done. The annual survey of industries gives you the information to do it, and we are shortly coming with a paper on that. But certainly, it stands to common knowledge that, for example, leather and leather products is one area in which the employment of labor is higher than apparel, and so on. So there are number of sectors, and if you look at it in terms of sector, the hospitality sector employs more labor. So even as we do and compelled to do the application of AI and other technologies, we should also try to identify sectors and industrial segments where the relative labor intensity is higher. For example, I think when we talk about sunrise industries, we really need to look at sunrise industries in terms of not only the output, but also in terms of employment. A typical example is, food processing industry. The food processing industry is one in which there is involvement of agriculture. There is a great demand for it, not only within the country, but from outside. And therefore, the employment of labor is also expected to be higher. But remember, the food processing industry also involves the canning of the products, and that is also partly capital intensive. The point that I wish to put before you is that we can still manage the employment situation if we can identify such industries and such sectors of the economy in which there is a relatively greater labor utilization, and really work on them. Having third, and the fourth one that I would like to put before you is that the strategy of development cannot be unidimensional. We cannot just say we will develop exports, we will develop services, and so on. I think it has to be multidimensional. It is true that in the early years after the Second World War, unidimensional approach also worked. The classic example of the East Asian countries, which focused on exports. The focus on exports led to the faster growth of South Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, and other countries. But that, I think, is no longer possible. Look at China, is a latecomer to that club. China also focused attention on exports. In 1973, China's exports constituted 1% of the world exports. Believe it or not, by 2021, by 2021, China's exports constituted 15.2% of the total exports. Look at the big jump of the total world exports. And that is what pushed China forward. So people seem to cite these examples. I must also say that India's growth during this period was not very great. India's share in world exports was 0.5 in the early period in 1973, and it became only 1.6% in 2021. Therefore, There are periods during which this has happened where can be unidimensional, but I think those days are gone. We are having problems today even on normal export trade, and the possibility of countries focusing only on exports and pushing the economy is not there. But certainly, in the case of small countries, where the market is very small, they necessarily have to look outside in order to be able to expand their economic activities and the total output. So I would say that given the present situation, we really need to be, the approach has to be multi-dimensional in the sense that we need to concentrate on agriculture, exports, manufacture, and so on. So we need to bear in mind both in relation to the growth of output, but also in terms of any other trade deals that we do. And finally, the fifth one, which I want to mention, and that I don't want to talk very much about it because that's not totally relevant to today's discussion. Invest more in health and education. The point is that if you want to absorb new technologies, naturally, higher education becomes critically important. Skill training is an integral part of the development process. And for that, we really need, I would say that the higher education becomes necessary. And health, many studies have clearly shown that not only health is wealth, but also health is something that healthy bodies create the ability to work better. Through subsidies or even cash disbursals may relieve the problems of vulnerable groups for a short period. But fundamentally, if you want to have a very strong country, we need to pay attention to health and education, and the investment in these areas become critically important. India's demographic profile is such that now that the younger dependency, that is, the number of people below a particular age who are dependent, is higher than the higher age dependency. And that critically means that we need to pay more attention to health and education. Now, I have just said what needs to be done if India is to grow faster. I put forward before you 5 important directions in which we have to move. First direction is raise the investment rate by 2 percentage points. Second is absorb new technologies. And third, focus on relatively labor-intensive activities. Third and fourth, the strategy of development must not be unidimensional, but must be multidimensional. And fifth, that invest more in health and education. Having said this, I'll come back to say a few words on how do we respond and how do we work towards in the context of the changing world. When I talk of the context of the changing world, one important development I have already mentioned, that is a new technology. That is one change that has happened. But more recently, what has happened, which I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, is the imposition of tariffs, which cut at the root of the basic strategy of development and the basic idea which underlies the growth process. What the developed countries used to teach to the developing countries in the early period was that we need to have free and fair trade, and it is that which will really deliver us the best results. Theoretically, it is very clear. Why free and fair trade enhances the total welfare of the world. Free trade essentially means that each commodity will be produced in that country which has the best advantage. And therefore, if world as a whole does it, as a consequence, the overall welfare can increase, even though it is subject to certain caveats, namely that developing countries which have not had the experience do not know their full potential, and therefore, until they achieve the ability to be able to produce the commodities, certain commodities, we have to give them the time. So that is why the word fair. So free and fair trade was considered to be the fundamental basis of the development process. That has been cut. And what we are now seeing is a situation in which those who preach to us on the advantage of free trade are the ones who are now coming in the way of free trade and putting various blocks. I believe that if I were talking to you about a few weeks ago on the same subject, I would have ended with a gloomy note. But things seem to have somewhat changed in the last week or 10 days. And there is some change in the attitude. The new trade agreement between US and India is subject to many concerns also, but at least makes one good move towards creating a situation where free trade can be present. I think the trade agreement with the EU is a very good one, because that has given us the opportunity to export goods to these countries almost at zero rate, and some of the countries like jewelry, textile, and leather goods, which are the critical exports on which we want to focus. But there is still not yet full clarity on what the US-India trade agreement will be, but hopefully that it will take into account the concerns of India. It looks reasonable and balanced as of now, but details will have to be worked out and see what their implications are. But on the whole, it is necessary to move into a situation where the growth of India can be facilitated. I think a very hostile environment prevailed in the United States against India, and that has to change. It is important to look at not only the specific actions implied in the trade agreement, but also what it does to the overall environment. In the overall environment, not only the trade in goods and services, but also what happens to investment becomes critically important. Bhanumurthy and I wrote a paper some 2 weeks ago about what is happening to the value of the rupee. The value of the rupee actually was falling, not essentially because of economic factors. The factor which was responsible mainly for the fall in the value of the rupee was the capital outflows, which were influenced, again, not by economic considerations, but because of the concern about lack of agreement between India and USA. And I think that the title of our article was "Diplomacy is the only answer to the fall in the value of the rupee." Since then, I think after this agreement, which is not fully cleared out, has helped the rupee to gain. What I'm saying is that look at what will happen to the overall environment. If the absence of a hostile environment leads to, in some sense, a better investment climate, that is something to be welcomed. So I will stop here and I will have a conversation with Dr. Bhanumurthy. But the point is, I wish to say is that India has built up the capability. I want to mention one fact before I go, and that is today, a growth rate of 6.5% per annum is almost assured. If you look at our growth rate, that is there. That is why we would say that the potential rate of growth as of now is 6.5. All our efforts should now be directed towards increasing the potential rate of growth from 6.5% to 7.5%. And that is where your minds and your thinking will count a lot. I do hope that as a result of the discussions here, we will all go wiser and better so that the country can get on to a path of achieving a growth rate of 7 to 7.5%. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, sir. I think you have given 5 lessons today in the morning for the people who are here. And let me thank MMA for this opportunity. And it's a very rare opportunity for me to converse with my boss. So I think we do converse every day in the morning. So we are doing that here. Sir, you have done so much to the Indian economy. For almost 3.5 decades, I think your contributions to Indian economy was so amazing that you have not really left anything for people in terms of economic public policy. One of the things that you have been arguing for some time is that, as you rightly pointed out, that we need to increase the investment rate to 2 percentage point right now. But we also know that large part of these investments are the 2% investment. It has to come from the domestic savings, right? If you look at India and China, I think large part of investments actually came from the domestic savings. Now, to attract that 2% investment, I think we need to mobilize through the domestic savings. But if you look at in the last few years, we also see that the domestic savings are actually coming down, so the causalities from savings to investment and then the investment to growth. So the trigger has to be on the savings side. So what is that you think that we need to do to really improve the domestic savings in the economy? Because we cannot depend on the foreign savings much.
Savings and investment are two sides of the coin. The savings rate is influenced by a certain set of factors. And investment is influenced by certain other set of factors. First of all, we need to create a situation in which the demand for investment increases. That is what I have been talking about this morning. What is it that has to be done? That the investment rate goes up from whatever the current level is by another 2 percentage points. So that really comes out of the perceptions of the investors regarding whether India's growth rate can be maintained at that particular level. So the first thing we need to look at is what is it that we have to do in order to raise the investment rate, and in what way in which the investment rate can go up. Is it government capital expenditures or is it private investment expenditures? Government capital expenditures also have to go because they go up. I mean, there is really no doubt about it. After all, the large part of the social infrastructure and more particularly the physical infrastructure will have to be provided by the government, and therefore the investment expenditure or the capital expenditure of the government also has to go up. But my point the point that I made a little while earlier is that the ability of the government to increase the capital expenditure is also reaching its limit. I mean, I think in some sense it did increase in the last few years after COVID, but it is, and therefore the private investment has to pick up. That is what what Keynes called the marginal efficiency of capital. That is the rate of return on capital, so to say, must be attractive enough for you to invest. Therefore, that has to be addressed. Now comes the second question, namely, if that investment is forthcoming, where are the savings in order to support it? I mean, in a sense, you are right. I mean, that the savings have not been picking up. In fact, savings are going down. In fact, the government savings are a little better now. I mean, I won't say little, a shade better than before. Therefore, the question will arise at one point that once the investment demand picks up and it becomes ready to be operationalized, then we will have to turn to the question that you asked, namely, how will it be supported and where are the savings? At that particular point, some critical questions will also arise. On the other hand, one can also say that part of this increased investment can be supported by what we call foreign savings in the sense of inflow of resources from outside. But there is a limit on that also, because the inflow of resources from outside is essentially equal to the current account deficit, and we cannot let the current account deficit also to go up. Therefore, the point that you make regarding household savings within the country also need to rise. And it's here some questions will arise about what is the role of interest rate. Because everybody, particularly the community here, assembled here, will also support the lowering of the interest rate. Because everybody thinks that the lowering of the interest rate is the prime mover of investment. Not always so. I mean, it is only the rate of interest in comparison with what the rate of return is the critical importance. So at that particular point in time, we will have to decide whether the rate of interest can be lowered beyond a particular point because it has an adverse effect on domestic savings. On that also, all economists are not completely agreed. Some people think that aggregate savings is not affected by interest rate, but its composition is affected by interest rate in the sense the investment or the savings in financial assets is influenced by interest rate, but savings in other forms may not be. But the point is well taken that as investment picks up and as the environment for investment picks up, we also need to look at what we do with respect to the resources that are needed, and the critically important is the domestic savings. As I said, there are limits to our current account deficit, so we'll have to know it. But therefore, we will address that issue as investment picks up.
Yeah, I think private investments not picking up has become a major concern. I think even Honorable Finance Minister kept on asking why that private investment is actually not picking, even after 125 basis point reduction in the interest rates, and also there's so much of public capital expenditure is happening. So I think we need to get answers from them rather than we answering why the private investment is actually not picking up. Sir, in terms of I think a lot of times we keep comparing ourselves with Asian countries as well as China, particularly in terms of the structure of the economy. Now, we know that we followed a service-led growth and we did reasonably well, I mean, for the past 3 decades. And we have seen the average growth of GDP going up to 6.5%. Now, if you want to go from here, from 6.5 to 7.5%, I'm sure you remember that one of the aims that we had was to increase the share of manufacturing sector to 25%. So right now, what we are seeing is there is a decline in the share of manufacturing sector. Is there a way we can relook at that particular in reviving the share of manufacturing sector? Now, on the factor markets also, during your period in RBI, you started so many reforms on the capital market side, on the banking sector side also. On the labor, we have seen recently there is some initiative on the labor reforms. Despite all that, why are we not really improving the share of manufacturing sector? Because it has huge implications on the employment, as you rightly pointed out. So how do we address this particular issue of almost stagnancy in the manufacturing sector share?
This has been a concern. I mean, that for a long time people have been saying that what is happening to the share of manufacturing in the total output, and the advantage of manufacturers is that it not only leads to increase in output, but also it is more employment intensive than the other activities, and this has been talked about. But I really want to make 2 points here. One is that the share, as we call it, is essentially how the cake is growing. Today, the services sector dominate the economy in the sense that they contribute more than 50% of the total output. Therefore, when we talk of share of manufacturers, we are essentially talking about the relative growth rate of manufacturers and the other sectors. In some sense, growth in service sector is also not a bad thing. I mean, in some ways, the distinction between service and manufacture is also not very clear. Some activities which were treated as manufacturers earlier are now treated as service sector, because people say that previously the company produced the commodity, packaged the commodity, and sent the commodity. And therefore, that was the total value of manufacturers. But now, many of them only produce. Packaging is done by something else and somebody else, and the transportation is done by somebody else. Therefore, there is a problem about the definition between the distinction between service and manufacturing. Certainly, the need for enlarging the base of manufacture, yes, I agree. But I am not quite concerned about the share, because the share we have to take a view that whether we want the services sector to expand or not. And perhaps we have the capability and the training now, and therefore the service sector will continue to grow. But the base of the manufacturer, I certainly agree, will have to expand, because you look at it in terms of employment. In terms of employment, it is very clear when manufacture grows, or let us say a factory grows, then it absorbs employment or absorbs people with different skills, from the top managerial skills to the skills needed in order to keep the factory clean. So it is therefore in the advantage of manufacture growing as against the high quality services growing is there, and the wide absorption of labor is something associated with manufacturers, and we really need to widen the base of the manufacturer also. But at the same time, we have built up the skills. We cannot give up our ability to compete more efficiently in terms of the services, and that we should also do it. I think, as I mentioned earlier, multidimensional, in which I would say yes, manufacture must grow, but also the service sectors also must grow. And I think really the Indian industry will have to seriously think about what they can produce and what they are not producing, and why they are not producing. I am surprised, for example, I think we talked about it some time ago, that how China is really intruding into the entire economy and producing things which you would think is not rocket science, but which they are producing and we are not producing. I was also surprised, for example, during the kite festival, people are all saying that these are Chinese kites, and also what is that?
Manja.
The thread, which is also made in China. Why? I mean, we have such a long tradition, and why we are not able to produce this and we have to import it from China? I think Indian industry needs to carefully look at what are all the commodities that we are importing. I wish to make one more point anyway, which I forgot to mention, that when I say you do import substitution, I do not mean the import substitution of the type that we had in the 1950s and 60s. I want import substitution to be done on competitive basis, that we should be able to produce some of these commodities which are not rocket science, and which we can produce and produce it efficiently and competitively. So it is that we should do. I think the Indian industry has to introspect about this.
Thank you, sir. Related to that, sir, now that recently government has notified the new labor codes, there is some perception from the industry that it is going to increase their cost of production. I am not really sure about it, but some of the things which is relevant for the manufacturing sector, unlike the service sector, is the issue of land. Land is another factor of production, right? And if you look at the kind of investment some of the states are receiving, it's actually correlated with the extent of land digitization or land records. So what is your view on these two important factors like land and labor? Is that really constraining the manufacturing sector? And also, is that really leading to the regional disparity that we see in this country?
If you look back, and I remember those early 1990s when we were introducing the reforms, the focus is essentially on a few things, and the focus was on commodities, tradable goods, and so on. But the question later on arose about labor and how labor also should be, the labor reforms are critically necessary. So in the capital market, we did quite a bit in order to be able to attract capital and use capital. So that much we did on one factor of production, capital. Then I think at that particular time, we did not have a free hand, so to say, to deal with labor. In fact, half of our time was also spent at that time to convince people that we are not against labor, we are not against the reforms are not against labor, I mean, and so on and so forth. And in those days, we used to say more market does not mean less government, but different government. So the changes had to be made slowly. But I think the labor code, I'm not an expert on labor codes, and all of you assembled here deal with these issues on a day-to-day basis. But by and large, it is the concern that it increases the cost of labor or the payment for labor will have to be carefully looked at. I mean, I think this is after all, in the days when minimum wage law was introduced, then it was also opposed on the ground that it will increase the cost of labor. But certain things have to be done from from a larger viewpoint. On land, see, on land we had very different views. In the early years after independence, for example, we actually introduced, in the case of agriculture, Land Ceiling Act. Yes. Actually, we did not want large farms. And now what has happened at the end of it all is that our land is all fragmented now, and the average size of land holding is so small that it is not even economically profitable or productive. The people talk about what you call land monetization, in the sense that the land that is available with the government, but which is not being utilized, can be sold, and that monetization can help actually in the government to expand its investment, expand the infrastructure. It is beset with many problems. Any sale of something like land, it can lead to a lot of controversy. There can always be an issue that we sold it at a lower price, and the rents have been taken away by somebody, and so on. The point that I wish to make is that the angle from which the problem is to be looked at has to be noted. If it is for the government to have larger resources at its disposal by disposing of land which is available with them, there is some logic to it. But that is something that has to be done with great care. Otherwise, it can lead to a lot of corruption and so on and so on.
Yeah, thank you. I think right now there is a land tokenization is also experimented in the country. So I think there's some reforms happening on that side. So is it a question? So there are some questions online, and one of the participants is asking, we are witnessing suboptimal utilization of critical resources. Sir, you can see there.
I can't read it from here.
Yeah. So how does?
The question?
Yeah, I think it's very different.
Yeah.
The question is, we are witnessing a suboptimal utilization of critical resources due to, it's at the back, it's on the screen.
Oh, here, is it? We are witnessing suboptimal utilization of critical resources due to.
Come on, Mentimeter.
It looks like a AI generated question.
Democracy and human undermined by political. No, in fact, this is a very. Yes. This is a much larger question. I mean, I think this is not nearly related to economics. I mean, this is the critical resources. We are just now talking
about the land, yes.
Yeah. And that's a problem, because to whom does the land belong? But if center and states have similar thinking, we can certainly utilize some of those resources better. But the question is not actually very clear. I mean, in the sense that what is the problem that we are really addressing? The center and the states certainly need to work together and really maximize the benefits to the country. There is no doubt about it. And in this center-state relationship, it is equally important that the center also realizes what the states need and how that should be, and what the role and what the center should be doing in order to facilitate the states for functioning. And it is also important on the part of the states to cooperate with the center. I mean, there is no doubt. I mean, there can be no difference of opinion, so to say, that it is the joint efforts of both the center and the states that will finally see our better utilization and efficiency.
Yeah. Coming to Tamil Nadu, now that we are here. So Tamil Nadu has been a pioneer in the manufacturing sector for a very long time, historically also. Now, as you rightly pointed out in your speech, there are so many new economy sectors are coming up, new emerging areas. And what it takes for the Tamil Nadu to adopt those new, what are the things that they need to do really to get into that new economy sectors?
Now, Tamil Nadu has done extremely well in terms of overall economic growth, in terms of industrial performance, in terms of absorbing new technologies, in terms of the production of services. That is without doubt. I mean, I think this is, and obviously there are newcomers, and there are other states which want to compete and take a larger share of the cake. But there are areas in which the Tamil Nadu can utilize its capabilities and move ahead. In fact, in our report that we had given to the government some years ago, we had identified some of the sectors. Now, certainly, the service sector is very well organized, and in terms of AI applications, Tamil Nadu must really play a big role. The other area was that the one industry that is growing very fast is pharma industry, and the pharma industry is not that strong as far as Tamil Nadu is concerned, and the new opportunities, what they call biopharma and so on, are opening up, and that is one area in which the Tamil Nadu government can go in. Then we had also identified many other specific sectors in which Tamil Nadu can grow up. For example, automobile, take it, is a strong base in Tamil Nadu, and perhaps with competition increasing in this area, particularly from abroad, it is really a strong a state with a strong base will be able to compete effectively with the foreign companies. And I think, therefore, the increased focus on that will become important. So I think the Tamil Nadu has not reached its limit. So Tamil Nadu has a much larger space to grow up, and certainly can absorb and work more in the new areas, and take care of the competition from others.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. I think we ran out of time now. And first of all, let me thank all of you for patience listening. There is a full report by Dr. Rangarajan that has been submitted to Tamil Nadu government in terms of what needs to be done, and maybe you want to look at it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Professor Bhanumurthy. What a treatise it has been to topmost economists with us this morning. Thank you, Dr. Rangarajan, especially. May I request Mr. Lakshmi Narayan, President MMA, and Mr. Unikrishnan, Senior Vice President, to come up to the dais and present a memento to both the dignitaries. Dr. Rangarajan, ladies and gentlemen, a legend in his own right. Been really a privilege for us to have him this morning here. And he's accepted our invitation, has spent so much time with us. I think it's very rare to have such luminaries amongst us. So thank you so much, sir. Let's give it up to him, ladies and gentlemen. At this age, he's been with us this morning, accepting our invitation and sharing his thoughts, so very current with whatever he's shared with us. I think so many takeaways that he has given to us. He's talked about the private investments that need to pick up, and he's talked about the multidimensional approach that we need to take for growth, rather than either focusing on services or only on the manufacturing. And Dr. Bhanumurthy, thank you so much. I think your conversation with him made this special, even more special. Let's give him also a big round of applause. Director, Madras School of Economics. So I think we should have him more often with us, because there are so many questions that's come online. Unfortunately, due to paucity of time, we couldn't take many of them. But I think most of them have been covered from his address and thereafter the conversation that we had. So, gentlemen, we are going ahead with our next session now, and that will be a special session 1. And a very, very important theme at us, talent and skills for the future. Particularly, there are a lot of young students here, young executives. I think we're going to address that. And give us a couple of minutes time as we set the stage for 5 people to occupy the stage of the next session.